Hey everybody, welcome to this week's podcast. I got pretty sick the past couple of days, so I'm going to apologize in advance if I'm coughy or sniffly or the podcast just sucks overall. But as you know, I don't skip weeks ever, so I'm still doing it. So let's jump right in and see if I could pull this week off. First up is something that is awesome news for anybody that has a PS1 digital. Dan and Christoph have added 1200p support, so specifically 1600 by 1200 resolution, a 4:3 aspect ratio. And this opens up a world of possibilities for customizing it and getting each resolution game to fill the screen top to bottom. Now, the PlayStation 1 has like 10 different resolutions it could use for games, so this is something that you'd have to mess with per game. However, Christoph also added the ability to, if you're using an X station, save settings per game, including resolution and any of the custom scaler settings. So it really is worth taking the time to do this if you have a PS1 digital and X station, because you only have to do it once. Now, there are still scenarios in which 1080p 5x or 1200p might be better or worse. I showed some examples here in the post. I'll go through it kind of quickly just because if you don't own one of these, you might not care as much. But games like Mega Man X, you could run it in 1080p 5x and it cuts off a bit of the top and bottom. You fill more of the screen, of the widescreen part of it, and it should be totally fine. However, if you switch to the 1200p mode and go into the custom scaler settings, you could have it perfectly fit the screen top to bottom with no black bars. And while either one is good for that, I usually like to have as much of the full widescreen view available. So for a game like Mega Man X, where there is no super important information on the top or bottom of the screen, I might still go 5x. There's no wrong answer. 1080p 5x as opposed to 1200p 5x. There's also some odd situations like Symphony of the Night, because of its weird resolution. Even if you set it to 1080p 5x in the PS1 digital custom scaler menu, you still have a tiny bit of black bars. But if you go to 1200p 6x by 6x, it's kind of perfect. It fills the screen just right. And then, of course, there's games like the Street Fighter Classic Collection, where really the only perfect way to do this is 1080p 5x. If you go to 1200p, it cuts off too much of the signal or just leaves a giant black bar around it. And same thing with original 1080p. So, overall, obviously this is for PS1 digital fans. It can't be done on original hardware. And if you don't have an X station, it might not be as exciting because you would have to toggle per game every time you launched the game. But this is really just a matter of preference. For me personally, to spend 10 seconds just going into the PS1 digital menu, flipping some settings, maybe writing it down so I don't have to mess with it next time. That seems like a pretty small amount of work to get a really cool look to the game. But, if you do have an X station, you just do it once and it always remembers it. And once again, this is a lot of the stuff that I talked about today really is focused on 2D games. With 3D games, you might not actually want to have it cut off and super sharp. You might want to set it to 960p and let your 4K TV scale it the rest of the way to kind of have a smooth plus sharp scaling. Of course, some of them you're going to want the HQ2X, 1X, or Stage 1 or Stage 2. So it's really just something that you're going to want to customize per each game, and it's so cool that you have the ability to do so. So thanks very much to Dan and Christoph for continuing to do amazing updates to this. The company Analogue has just confirmed that the Analogue Pocket will be delayed until probably October of this year due to part shortages. And that seems completely plausible because everybody I know who's making any kind of electronics are having to go back and redo the bill of materials and switch out parts and make slight tweaks to the design because there is so much of a part shortage going on right now. So that makes complete and perfect sense to me. Also, they said that the Super NT will be back in stock in April, and the Mega SG and DAC will also be in stock, they said, shortly after. So it's no surprise, but no shade thrown. That completely makes sense to me, and it's a problem that everybody else is running into these days. So I guess, another 6 months plus till we see the Analogue Pocket, but it's to be expected these days. So recently I've run into a few situations where I've wanted to kick off the update process for the Mr. FPGA project, either without a monitor connected or while something else is on the screen. I'll get back to that in a second. So I jumped on the Mr. Discord, talked to a bunch of people there, and was able to figure out how exactly to do this. And I put up instructions for how to write an SSH script, either just manually typing it in or creating a batch file in order to do that. Now, I want to start out by saying this looks so much more complicated than it is. If you've ever done even the mildest IT-related stuff before, this is basically a copy and paste and then save as a batch file, so you don't even have to do it again. You just press a button in the future. But this all kind of sparked from my mini Mr. Cade project, in that unlike all of my other Mr. setups, when I'm going to run the update to it, like if I'm hooked up to my RGB monitor, for example, I could kick off the update process and then press the input button on my monitor, set it to an input that doesn't have anything connected, and then the screen is black for the 10 minutes it takes to update. So no problems there. But on the mini Mr. Cade, there's no way to just turn off the CRT, which is pretty much the same in almost every arcade environment or arcade machine environment. So I thought, well, all right, in a perfect world, you'd be able to set a screensaver, so you don't have to worry about that at all. But what's another way to go about doing this? So I thought, all right, why don't I fire up the 240p test suite, and depending on the monitor and your goal, either load up an all black or an all white screen. If your arcade monitor has a little bit of burn-in, maybe a white screen might slightly help over time, and then kick off the update process remotely, so it's running in the background and your arcade machine either has nothing or a solid color on screen, so you don't get any burn-in from the middle scrolling of, just the look of the update process. So all you really have to do is figure out the IP address of your MiSTer, which, I mean this respectfully, I don't mean this as a dig, but if you can't figure out how to find something's IP address, this is probably just out of your technical reach. But if you know how to log into your router and get an IP address, you could run an SSH script, even if you've never done it before. Once again, I mean that as like a positive scent of, or a bit of encouragement, not like finger wagging if you don't know how to find an IP address. But so you find the IP, you run a command, it's going to give you some prompts for stuff, and then that's it. It automatically kicks off the update process and even shows you the progress in a command prompt window, so you'll know when it's done. Most of these reboot themselves anyway after you do a big update, but at least you could see the whole process. And once you've confirmed that that works, you could save that command, as well as just adding the word pause at the end. Save it as a batch file so that in the future, all you have to do is just open the batch file, enter your password, which the default is the number 1, and hit enter. So at any time in the future, as long as this works and as long as your IP address doesn't change, which doesn't happen too often with home routers, the first time you do it's a few minutes. The second time you do this is quite as simple as just powering on your MiSTer, giving it a second to connect to your Wi-Fi or your home network, and then clicking on this batch file and hitting 1 and enter, and that's it. So like I said when I started, it seems way more complicated than it is, but the end result is a very, very easy way to just kick this off and update your MiSTer remotely. And it's funny too, because when I wrote this up, last Wednesday or something like that, or whenever it was, last Tuesday, I kind of thought like, all right, well, this is how I'm going to update my mini Mr. Cade, and I probably won't ever use it, but I'm glad I have it. And like 2 days later, another big update came out, and I was, my RGB monitor was in use. I didn't have like a spare flat panel to put it on, so I just plugged my other MiSTer into the network, waited for it to boot, ran the batch file, and I just kind of laughed like, wow, I think I'm going to use this a heck of a lot more than I thought. So, just, if you're into this stuff at all, or if you think the ability to kick off an update without actually being in front of your MiSTer is something that's important to you, check this out. This probably didn't require a 5-minute rant on the podcast, but I was just very happy with the whole results of it all, and ended up using this a heck of a lot more than I thought, even though it's been less than a week. So I just figured this was something I'd really want to share with other people, and hopefully help other people out who are looking to do the same thing. The Computer History Archives project just uploaded 2 videos that were Sony factory promotional tour videos that I thought were so cool. One of them was about their CRTs, and they, in that video, specifically talked about how they make their flat glass CRTs, or how they made them back then at least, and why they were so challenging. And it also described why TVs were curved at all to begin with, which had to do with the pressure of the vacuum and how a curved piece of glass was stronger to do that. Definitely check that out in the video. They did a good job describing that, way better than I am right now. And the other video that they put out was of the rear projection CRT TVs, which really reminded me how much I want to go back and check one of those out, because it's been a long time since I've seen one in person. I think I was a kid the last time I saw a CRT rear projection, and it was very unimpressive. Even as a kid, I remember how it didn't look that good at all. But I mean, it could have just been a beat up old TV. We weren't rich. I didn't have rich friends, so I imagine anybody whose TV I saw was probably just the cheapest one they got. So I'd love to see how they compare to actual CRTs, to CRT projectors, and to other things out there. But, anybody around the New York area that's got a rear projection CRT, let me know. I'd love to do a video on that or something. But overall, I just thought it was a very, very cool set of videos, and they weren't very long, so I would strongly recommend them to anybody with absolutely any interest in this, even a little bit, just because it was a very cool look into these things. And I also just want to remind everybody that while they're a year or two old, the Technology Connections video on the story of the Trinitron and how analog color TVs work are still completely relevant. Obviously, nothing's outdated because it's not like there's new CRT info out there. So if you want to go down a fun rabbit hole, check out those two promotional videos first, then jump into the two Technology Connection videos and go from there. It looks like Nintendo is officially discontinued the Super Mario 3D All-Stars game and the new Game & Watch that was released. Vanessa kind of made this into a sort of satirical April Fool's Day post, but if you scroll down a little bit, it's actually all really good information. The joke's kind of funny too. I'm always a fan of a good 16:9 joke, but the unfortunate not joke part of this is that if anybody remembers correctly, last year Nintendo announced that they were only making a limited amount of a certain of both the 3D All-Stars games and the Game & Watch, and I think maybe one other thing, can't quite remember at the moment, which is not a tactic that I would expect Nintendo to do. That's like I don't know. That's more of like something that a smaller company that's looking to sell their inventory would do. Companies like Nintendo that are that big don't normally need to resort to that. So I'm not sure what this was all about. Maybe it was just an experiment. They're allowed to make mistakes too. But the bottom line is those games are no longer in print, and you could no longer get the 3D All-Stars from their digital store either, which probably means the physical versions are going to go up in price, which sucks, but it is what it is. Also, the online battle royale mode has also been shut down, and that style of gameplay is no longer going to happen. So overall, this was just weird, and I hope Nintendo doesn't make this a habit. I guess you could still find 3D All-Stars games out there brand new for normal prices, because they did make a specific amount of them and shipped them all out. But when those run out, that's when, that's probably when the prices are going to spike. So if you were looking for either the Game & Watch or the 3D All-Stars cart, it's probably the best time to pick it up before they sell out, and then you have to pay scalper prices. Epos Vox just posted a video talking about HDMI pass-through in capture cards and if they add lag or not. He also went into details of a bunch of other things and was overall, as usual, a good video, but I thought this was important to share because it's something that I've talked about before. While some capture card pass-throughs add lag, not all of them do. However, some of the knockoff ones that say gaming capture cards do add lag to the pass-through mode. So Epos Vox used the time sleuth to show this. It showed that a lot of them don't add anything at all or sub-millisecond. And that's just another thing I always want to remind people. Milliseconds is not microseconds. So if you have something with a bunch of microseconds of lag added, it's zero. Just in your mind, that is zero. Sub 1 millisecond, unless you're using light guns, it should always be considered zero. In fact, there's an argument that like 5 to 8 and less could also be considered for gamers to be zero. But at the very least, in the context of this video, if it's less than a millisecond, it's zero lag added. And he went through a bunch of different capture cards to test if they do actually add lag through their pass-through mode. He also showed the NVIDIA's LDAT test kit, which I think this was the first time I remember seeing anybody test it. So I thought that was pretty cool. Also, the only other thing I wanted to mention is that playing your games through the capture card is something I know that people do, but it adds quite a bit of lag to it. And that's another thing that Epos has done videos on, and also has a Google Doc that shows the measurements that he's taken doing this. I've kind of experimented with this a little bit as well, but he definitely has you covered in how much latency is it from the when you plug your console into your capture card to when something appears on screen through something like OBS. And some of them are tolerable. Some of them are like 2 frames of lag, but most are not. Most are not capture cards that you would ever want, or most are not experiences that you would ever want to have, especially for retro gaming. Maybe modern games that were designed to be played on TVs that have variable amounts of lag depending on your brand, but I would never really recommend playing retro through a capture card in the OBS window. And in fact, if you notice in most of the videos that I show gameplay footage, I suck when I'm playing those games. I'm not that good at video games anyway, but I'm not nearly that terrible. And the reason is I'm sitting here with the console plugged into my capture card, recording it on OBS, trying to play through the capture window. So just some perspective that I wanted to share. Please check out the video in the post if you want more information. But, you know, lag is something that every gamer has to deal with. Modern, retro, doesn't really matter. So it's always good to keep up on this stuff and see what's the best equipment for your setup. A team of people have been working on a fan-made 2D conversion of Metroid Prime. There's now a demo of a PC version available that allows you to get a few items and gets somewhat into the game, and I thought it was absolutely amazing. This is a mostly spoiler-free overview, so I don't think anybody would be upset to hear any of this, but basically, it's a fan-made demake, if you will, but it looks great, it sounds great, it almost feels like what a 2D version of the game would have been like coming from Nintendo. And it doesn't just feel like a 2D conversion. So it's not like they took Super Metroid or something and tried to backport all the levels. It's something that they obviously spent some time creating the feel for it. My only complaint, if you could even say that, is the controls. But once again, this is a beta. So, you know, no shade thrown at them whatsoever. But you have to use the keyboard and mouse to control it. And while I thought it was pretty interesting that it allows you to aim with the mouse, I thought that was pretty cool, and you got some faster action that way. The keyboard thing really wasn't comfortable at all. Now, I know people have run programs to map the controls so they could use something like an Xbox controller on it, and that's cool, but I'm pretty sure if the team continues work on that, they'll just add that as a feature at some point between now and then. But I really enjoyed it. I got up to one of the bosses and didn't finish just because the controls were kind of driving me nuts. But it really felt like a real Metroid game, and I'm so excited to see if they have the time to finish it, or of course, if Nintendo tries to squash the project before that. You never know with them. But overall, if you're a fan of the Metroid series at all, 2D or 3D, I would check this one out, because even if you like 3D games better, I think you would enjoy the perspective and experience of seeing a 2D version. And if you're an old fart gamer like me and strongly prefer the 2D versions, this is really, now you get your true sense of Prime, of what Prime would have been if it was designed in a 2D perspective. So overall, I just was so impressed. And the only other thing to add, only other few things, is it's designed to run on Windows 10 64. People have had mixed success running it on different platforms, but I ran it that way and it was fine. And also the native resolution seems to be about widescreen 240p, give or take. I didn't have time to get it running on an RGB monitor, but I thought that would be, I thought the look of it would really feel at home, especially if I did something like set my my laptop or something to output maybe even, double the resolution of the game or something like that, and then used a downscaler to get like a true 240p widescreen feel. I think that might be pretty cool. So I'll get to that in the future. Hopefully the team will keep working on this, but this is definitely exciting for fans of Metroid at all. Castlemania Games is now selling DB Electronics PowerBase Mini and PowerBase FM. And these are converters that allow you to use Sega Master System cartridges on Genesis consoles, but the FM version also has the FM sound chip, which allows you to play those games with the extra sound channel. And there's surprisingly a lot of games with FM sound, even though it was only officially supported in Japan. Some of the games, the FM channel's not really finished, so it doesn't sound that great, but others are really impressive. And this is interesting because this is only one of 2 plug-and-play ways to use original cartridges to get FM sound. Now, before I continue, I just do want to put it out there that any of the top-tier Genesis ROM carts will allow you to play Master System ROMs with FM sound, and of course, you could always experience it through emulation if you just want to hear what it sounds like. But this is specifically for people that want to use original cartridges, and a lot of us really want that experience either all the time or at least some of the time, which is why this is relevant. And if you're looking for FM sound from Master System carts, you could install something inside your SMS, or I guess maybe even in the official Powerbase converter to get that. Or you could get an MK2000 Japanese SMS and a cartridge converter. Or you can get this and play it on a Genesis. So it really is, the FM version really is one of the only ways to plug and play, get that extra sound channel from original carts. Now, the plain old Powerbase Mini without the FM channel is still cool, but it's really up to you if that's something you want. Would you want to just use ROM carts? Do you want original SMS carts? If you have a Genesis 1, do you want to get this absolutely awesome UFO-looking original Powerbase converter? Which are expensive, but, it's really up to you. However, do you have a Genesis 2, a modded Genesis 3, a Nomad that's been modded, an XI that's compatible? Not all of them are compatible with Master System. A CDX. Do you have any of these things that won't physically fit that bigger Powerbase converter and you want to use your Master System games? That's where the Powerbase Mini comes in, because it basically looks kind of like a Game Genie in that it's just a small Genesis cartridge with a cartridge port on top. So it'll fit in anything that accepts a Genesis cart. So it's, once again, it's obviously for people that specifically want to use original cartridges. And if you do, now you have a choice of 2 different versions that will run on anything that accepts a Genesis cart that's compatible with Master System games, either natively or with a mod. The MDFourier team has just started work on an Amiga port of the software, which is great news for both musicians and audio preservationists. So overall, the Amiga was about as powerful as a Genesis, give or take. I'm oversimplifying just because it's not the point of the post here. But one of the things that set it apart was its Paula chip, which is an audio chip that allowed for sample-based audio as well. And as a result, this made the Amiga something that a lot of electronic musicians would use for creating their songs, as well as things like demo scene projects and homebrew and other stuff like that. So basically, it's a platform that when you recreate the audio, you want to make sure it's as accurate as possible so that these things that were created on it sound the same today as they did on the original hardware, which is exactly the goal of the MDFourier project. So overall, it's exciting to see this get ported to more platforms. I know Dopefish and Bernie have been working on this as well, and I guess it's been progressing pretty quickly. So if you're really into the project, I would follow them on Twitter, as well as, of course, follow the 240p Test Suite project on Patreon. And also, there's the MT32 Pi project that Dopefish had worked on, and a few other things out there that Dan talked about in the post. So if you want more information on the Amiga and its audio, I would definitely check this out just as a quick starting point, because it seems like a really cool platform that could be used for anything from music creation to just making your own cool new homebrew games. Great news for fans of the Sega Saturn. The 21-pin version of the Fenrir optical drive emulator is now available for pre-order from Castlemania Games. The same link works for both. You just have to check it from the drop-down menu. And the 20-pin versions of it would be shipping later this month, and the brand new 21-pin version should be shipping in early June. So if you were looking for a Fenrir, this is definitely a good time to pick one up. And if you weren't really sure which is the best option overall for your Saturn, there's 3 major choices that you would want to get these days, and each of them have their advantages and disadvantages. They all perform really well, though, so there certainly isn't any one that has like major features over the other. They all perform pretty similarly, but the basic overview is the Fenrir is the cheapest. So at $140 plus any micro SD card, including one you might have laying around or just a cheap 64 gig, you're looking at a really cheap way to get into optical drive emulation for the Saturn. Now, on the flip side of that, there's the Satiator, which is the most expensive at $260, but requires no installation. You just plug it right into the MPEG slot and back. And while the installation of the Fenrir and the other option, the mode, is pretty easy, it's still installation, whereas the satiator, you could just plug it in. If you want to take it to a friend's house, unplug it, plug it in the other one. It is quite literally just a plug-and-play device. So that might be appealing to a lot of people. Also, the mode is out, and while that's also really expensive at $235, expensive is a relative term. So if you wanted to just use a 64 gig micro SD, yes, it's definitely far more expensive than the Fenrir would be. However, what if you wanted to use a 1 terabyte card? And that's where it gets interesting, because if you wanted to have the entire Saturn's library on the Fenrir, a 1 terabyte micro SD plus the Fenrir is actually going to be more expensive than a mode with a 1 terabyte SSD. So they're all great options. They're just options to fit different scenarios. And I would just pick whichever is the one that you would prefer based on your needs. I've tried them all. I like them all. And at some point, I'm going to go back and do another shootout of which one's the right for your setup. All the loading times are about the same. They're all great. And if you want to learn more about the Fenrir, check out my review on it. It's still totally relevant. The only things that are outdated in it are some of the newer features and some of the upgrades, but just the basic performance, installation, and everything else is the same. So at the very least, it would give you a good sense of what to expect. But I'm really happy to see this project progress, and I'm certainly interested to see what SED has coming next. Well, that's it for this week. Hopefully it came out okay. I definitely sick and loopy, but I still powered through it, and I still had a good time doing it, but I'm sure I made a bunch of mistakes and skimmed over stuff, rambled more than I used to, so try to be a little gentle on me in the comments this week, knowing that I certainly tried my best. I didn't want to skip a week. I know I've had guest hosts before, but those were all scheduled in advance, and I felt really bad just springing this on somebody and saying, hey, can you drop what you're doing right now and shoot this for me? I'd rather just power through it and get it done, and hopefully still come across positively, because I'm still in a good mood. You could be sick and in a good mood too, but anyway, enough of my rambling. You've heard me enough this week. As always, thank you to everybody who watches and listens, who plays nicely in the comments, and especially thank you to anybody who supports in any way, because it's your support, and especially those monthly services, that's what's keeping all of this stuff going. The posts, the podcast, the bigger production videos, and all of the tremendous amount of behind the scenes research that I do love being a part of. So thank you all so much for making this happen, and I'll see you next week.